Mr. Beiderson, the UN Special Envoy for Syria, thank you so much for giving us this interview for Al-Majalla.
A pleasure. Good to see you.
It's good timing. Now we are doing this interview. We all know that in the last 12 days, 2 weeks, huge change happened in Damascus. What is your reading to what happened?
We have to be honest and admit we were all surprised. You know, I think the Syrians were surprised. I even believe the armed groups that are now in Damascus and the de facto authorities were surprised by the speed with which this happened. I think no one foresaw that the Syrian army could collapse the way it happened. And indeed also that there was no real interventions from Russia or from Iran. And so, you know, after then coming to Aleppo after a very short period, then moving on to Homs, and then Damascus before 14 days, it was sort of unheard of. So not only was I surprised, I think the whole world were surprised.
When Damascus fell, when the regime fell, I guess you were in Doha after Astana process foreign ministers meeting. So there's this theory that actually there was a deal before the whole offensive by HTS started, and there was sort of understanding between the stakeholders. What is your comment on this? Was there any deal before the offensive started?
Well, if it was, then I was not informed. And frankly speaking, I would be very surprised if there were any such deal. I do believe that, as I said at the very beginning, everyone was surprised that this actually ended up in Damascus. I'm sure there were different theories of what would be possible, but in my discussions in Doha, you know, with the Turks, with the Iranians, and the Russians, and later on with the Arab foreign ministers, there were very little indications that there had been sort of a deal before this offensive started. I even think, you know, that the Russians were surprised, in particular by the fact that they didn't see the Syrian army really putting up a fight. And I think the Iranians as well were surprised by this. Then I think what happened during Saturday was that there was sort of a realization that it was coming towards an end. But I think it was the speed of the military actions from the armed groups that basically, and that there was no agreement. That is my reading of the situation, but I could of course be wrong.
Do you have any theory? Of course, you're not specialized in military business, you're not military analyst, but do you have any theory why the regime, the Syrian army, did not fight?
I think it must be a combination of factors. Not only militarily, I believe. I think it goes back to nearly 14 years of war and conflict, and the fact that, you know, I think the Syrian people have sort of been promised that this conflict were, for all practical purposes, over, while of course we have been saying all along it is not over. That there are huge challenges, and I think what really contributed even more to that was the economic collapse. The fact that the society really was at the edge before this offensive started. And I think what we have then seen after the earthquake, where there were hopes that the normalization with the Arabs would bring something positive and new to the Syrian people. And what actually happened was that the economic situation got worse, and that the Assad regime did not engage in any political discussions. They didn't engage with what the Arabs asked, they didn't engage with the Turks, and seriously, they didn't really engage with me.
And absolutely, they did not engage with you, and you've been in this post almost for more than 5 years, and you did not meet with Assad. Actually, Assad refused to meet you. So my question is, now, today, how do you feel? Are you happy that actually Assad always refused to see you, that you didn't see him?
No, I think it's not about me. I think it's about the fact, as I said, that he didn't engage. that he didn't understand that the future of the Syrian people could have been decided by political means, not by a military offensive. Of course, our hope is that when we now have the situation in Damascus, we will turn it into a political process that can facilitate and implement and hopefully, meet all the aspirations of the Syrian people. But that is really the problem. I think that he believed it could be possible to really continue as if the Syrian society, the Syrian people were not divided. The Syrian people were divided, and they wanted a change, a positive change, and he did not enable that.
So Assad is gone, the Syrian government is gone, the Syrian regime is gone, but the whole mandate, your mandate, based on 2254, is to facilitate dialogue between the Syrian government / regime and the opposition. And now, after 5 years, now the reality is the party that you never been engaged with, the party that is designated as terrorist organization in 2254 are in charge in Damascus. How does it mean for your mandate and for your mission?
First, I think it's very important that we remind ourselves about the principles of 2254. And I would say there are two core principles when it comes to Security Council Resolution 2254. As you said, it was adopted exactly 9 years ago as we are speaking. So the two core principles are the following: that there should be, a political transition in Syria that should be led and owned by the Syrian people themselves. I think that's the first key principle. The second principle is that it's about protecting the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. That principle is still alive. But then, as you rightly point to, obviously there has been a development on the ground since the resolution was adopted. And we have to look carefully at that, and we have to look at the facts. And then, of course, the big question becomes, how do we define HTS today? Well, until today, as you pointed out, it's listed as a terrorist organization. The good news is that that doesn't stop us from talking to HTS. So it's possible for us to have a dialogue. And I would also like to emphasize this, that if they actually do what they are saying that they want to do, that they're saying that they want an inclusive process that brings together all communities in Syria, all parties in Syria. If they do that, then I really do believe the time has come to look at that designation, because then the realities have changed.
Does that mean that you are willing to take the flight tomorrow or now to Beirut, then to drive to Damascus and to meet with Ahmed al-Shara?
Well, tomorrow I'm heading to Jordan. There will be a meeting of foreign ministers, and we will be there to discuss, and hopefully it will be possible to have what I call a unified message to the Syrian people. A message about hope for the future, but also I think about what is expected, so that there can be a real, sort of a meeting of minds between what is now happening in Damascus and between the international community. And then I also hope very soon to be able to visit Damascus.
So are you working on it?
Yes, we are working on it, yes.
So can we...
And I can assure you, you will be the first to know.
But for me, the political meaning of that is important. But for you, because I know it is very tricky business for you and I think for them, but for you now, is that have you made the decision that you will start official communication with HTS, with Ahmed al-Shara?
Yeah, I have made clear from day number one that the job of the United Nations is to talk to all parties, including HTS. So that is not a taboo for the United Nations. So, and we will continue that, and I think we are now in a situation where there is a caretaker government. We have 3 months to hopefully work with the Syrian parties to prepare for a transitional arrangements that meets the requirement that we have been discussing so far. And we are more than willing to reach out and discuss with all the Syrian parties in this situation.
Just for me, just to follow up on this. So you are going to Damascus to meet al-Shara. Is that correct?
Listen, the details of the visit is not decided yet. But as I said, we are open to meet with all parties in Damascus. That's not the issue. The details of how this is going to happen, hopefully we will have clarity during the next few days.
Ahmed Shara Abu Muhammad al-Jolani announced a few days ago the new interim government, or new government that used to govern Idlib, now governing Damascus or Syria in theory. How did you see this government?
It's very important what you said, that this is a caretaker government in place for 3 months. We are not 100% sure whether all ministers have been appointed or what is happening. So we need some clarity on this. But as you know, my advice has been from day number one, and not only my advice, I think this is really a position of, and the hope of millions of Syrians, that it needs to be from day number one an inclusive governance structure in Syria. And I really hope that also during this 3 months period, this is what we will be seeing. But then I have noticed that they are saying that they want to prepare, for a new constitution and for transitions, other kinds of transition arrangement to take place after 3 months. So what we need now to focus on is that these 3 months, that it brings stability, that it brings inclusiveness, it brings on board all Syrians, and that we don't see new divisions and strife during this period. I think that is extremely important.
Could you please say again that the conditions or criteria that you are expecting Shara or HTS or the interim government to do it?
Yeah, and let me emphasize this. This is not sort of a message from me. This is what I see as a message that has been coming from the armed groups themselves. This is what we are hearing from all Syrians, from all communities, and we are hearing it from a united international community, that it needs to be a credible, inclusive process. And what does that mean? It means that it includes all Syrian communities, different parties, different armed factions, and that building on that, they can create a consensus for how to move forward in the future. It sounds simple, but we all know that governance is difficult. Governance, one thing is to lead a military campaign for 14 days, but to sit and govern Damascus, of course, is a very different challenge.
Saying inclusive, does that mean to include the former regime elements? Does that include that mean to include SDF?
Let's put it like this. I think it needs, and this is what I'm hearing already, is that they want to keep and preserve the institutions of the state. So obviously they have sent out an appeal to civil servants who have been working with the previous government. So I think that's a good sign. And then I think it will be up to this, what I call this inclusive process, who is included from the former government, from the other groups. But this needs really to be a Syrian-led and owned process, where no one wants to send diktat. But what we want to see is that we bring everyone in, as has been stated, as I said, by the armed groups themselves. This is the hope of the Syrian people themselves and by the international community. So I think we have a solid foundation for moving forward along these lines. And then, obviously we will have to follow, as I said, very carefully how this is implemented in practice.
Mm-hmm. Do you have time frame for this?
I think, as I said, they have now established a time frame for 3 months.
3 months. Mm-hmm.
So, and it's very important that these 3 months are used also in an inclusive manner to prepare then for the new transitional arrangement.
How the time frame for the second stage of the transition?
Yeah, these are things.
The same with the 254, which is 18 months?
Listen, we will have to look at this, of course, in a close dialogue with our Syrian friends and see what are necessary. Listen, let's remember that the economy has collapsed. There are now already 400,000 refugees who came back from Lebanon, And there are thousands who want to go back, and also internally displaced that wants to go back to their homes. And if we are not able to fix the economy very quickly, this will be a huge, huge challenge. And I think, so therefore it's so important that there is a good communication between the the fact authorities in Damascus and the international community, because there will be an enormous need for economic support and immediately for humanitarian support.
HTS people around HTS leadership, they're saying, I mean, why should we engage with the UN Special Envoy? I mean, he's been neglecting us for, like the whole UN envoys neglecting us for almost more than 10 years. And we always been not part of the process. Why should we do it now? What incentives that you can offer to the HTS that they to be engaged with you?
I would like to put it a little bit differently. I think the reality is that the armed groups are governing, hopefully, the whole of Syria. The whole of Syria is obviously a part of the international community. It has diplomatic representation, it's part of the United Nations. So, it's not that we are enforcing ourselves on the de facto authorities in Damascus. This is, how a state operates. They work with the United Nations, and then, of course, we will have to discuss what is needed. But as I said, I think we have now, through many years, developed ideas together with Syrian parties, and this is important. This is sort of not something we will be sort of forcing upon the heads of the others. No, this has been in a dialogue with others, where we have many, many ideas for how we can move forward in the transitional period. Because as we started discussing, this has from late 2015 has been about how can we move forward with transitional arrangements in Syria. So I think we can be of help and assistance in that. And then, of course, at this particular stage, humanitarian assistance, extremely important. And the UN will be there for that. Then there is, of course, the question of accountability and justice, where the UN has a lot of expertise and can be on help and to make sure that this happens. And let me just mention one more thing. I mentioned the refugees. Of course, here the UNHCR has a critical role to play.
So in a way, what I understand from you is in a way you are referring to something called conditional engagement with them. In a way, okay, if they move into the right direction, so you can offer, or you, the international community can offer some kind of incentives, like to be lifted from Al-Julani himself to be lifted from the terrorist list, the HTS to be lifted from terrorist list, and maybe some sanctions to be lifted.
Yes, I think it's extremely important that we see a development that hopefully would lead to the lifting of HTS as a terrorist organization. I think that would be extremely important. But as you rightly pointed out, we need to see that actually what they're saying is implemented on the ground. Then, very glad you mentioned that, extremely important that then this will be followed by the lifting of sanctions. Because if sanctions are not lifted, economic recovery in Syria will not be possible. And for this, we need a common understanding, in particular between the Europeans and the Americans on the way forward.
But who will move first? So expect HTS to move first.
Listen, it's already happening. Let's be honest. As I said, from day number one, when we saw the movements towards Damascus, that actually what was happening on the ground was positive. Of course, there are challenges. We shouldn't hide that. Yes, there are challenges, absolutely. But they've been saying the right things. They're saying that they want an inclusive process. They're saying this is, Syria should be for all communities. And I think if we really see this now developing, I think there should be a good opportunity to be able to lift the listing of HTS.
How soon you think?
No, I'm afraid I'm not the one deciding on this.
Who will decide?
Of course, this is the member states that will have a say. But I have noticed that what I'm now telling you is already said by many key states already.
Even Russia?
Yes, I cannot talk on behalf of the Russians, but I would be very surprised if also they didn't see the need for stability and development in Syria.
Completely different subject, which is a very painful subject for many Syrians. I am sure you've witnessed the what's been revealed about missing people, prisoners. I'm sure you followed Sadnaya, the other prisons.
Yes.
Your comment, Mr.
No,
Pedersen.
it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. Just to see the faith of those who have been coming out. I think
the lucky ones.
The lucky ones, as you rightly said. I think some of the scenes are just. It's not possible to describe it, and how you feel after watching this, and then the families and also what they are feeling, and then, as you said, maybe then there are no tens of thousands that are still missing. So we really mourn with all the families that so far have not been able to connect with their loved ones, or not even know the faith of their loved ones. This is really one of the huge tragedies of the Syrian conflict. And as you know, it's sort of been one of my key priorities from day number one, and it's one of my biggest sadnesses is that we were never really able to move forward in a positive manner on that file.
It is one of the sticking issues in the future of Syria, to build a new Syria. This is part of the big issue. I've already, by the way, I was with my family. Already you can see how difficult this issue will be. What kind of advice, what kind of role can, of course, I know you've been involved in this before, but now, as we speak now, what kind of role UN Special Envoy Office can help to address this issue?
I think, we have different institutions within the UN that can help. We have the newly established independent commission that will be looking into the file of the missing, and that I think can be hopefully of great help to the authorities now in Damascus. Then, of course, it's the whole question about accountability and justice, and also of what I would call the question of reconciliation and truth finding, and how you can sort of get all of these things moving together in a manner that will give justice to the victims, but also can contribute to healing the wounds after so many years of war and conflict, and with this immense suffering that we have just been witnessing.
There are a lot of challenges ahead. Of course, a new era now for the Syrians, but there are a lot of challenges, I think, ahead. Of course, one of them is the Israeli intervention. Of course, we all know it's public. It's public knowledge that they have already destroyed the whole strategic assets of the Syrian state of Syria. But in addition to it, actually, they violated the UN-sponsored disengagement agreement 1974. What's your comment on this?
No, I've said, and I want to repeat this has to stop. It's a violation, as you said, of the agreement from 1974, and it's a violation of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So it's a violation of international law. I also said it's extremely important at this stage that Syria's neighbors do not do anything that can complicate even more the very difficult process of creating a transitional arrangement that would be viable and could bring, the hope to the people of Syria. So really, we need to see that these things stop.
I don't know, now a lot of people are talking about it again. Now, it seems that we are entering a new phase, the whole Syria entering a new phase, which is the struggle for Damascus or the struggle of Syria, which means what we're seeing now, the game is not over.
Yes.
Do you see that's happening?
What is happening?
A struggle for Syria.
I think we are, we are in the situation, as one historical figure has said, we are in the situation where, what didn't happen during decades are now happening during weeks.
Lenin said it.
I didn't say Lenin, you said Lenin. Good. and that is what is happening. And the reality is therefore that it is difficult to really clearly see where we're moving forward. Of course, there have been also big changes in the region. We have seen what's happening and is continuing in Gaza. We are seeing what happened in Lebanon. We have now a ceasefire. Hopefully that will last. We have seen the dramatic weakening of Hezbollah. We have seen the fact that Iran seems to no longer have a presence in Syria. We have obviously seen a weakening of Russia's position in Syria. We have the potential for, let me rephrase. There is obviously a conflict in the northeast of Syria still going on, where we have Turkey as a NATO member with a potential conflict with the United States, another member. So all of this brings, I think, a lot of uncertainties. And then, of course, you have Arab neighboring states that are following very closely what is happening in Syria. But I think really that after 13 years of war and conflict, where we have seen 6-7 million refugees leaving Syria, going to the neighboring countries, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Turkey, to other Arab states, and to Europe, I think no reasonable international actor wants a repetition of this. So I think there is a wish to see stability in Syria. And that's why I'm saying let's not now do anything that will prevent us from achieving that stability. It's a huge responsibility to the Syrian parties and a huge responsibility for the international community that we do not miss this opportunity for a new beginning for the Syrian people.
So do you feel that the whole Middle East the whole structure of Middle East in a making?
No, I wouldn't say that because there are many places where there is stability and nothing. There is no big changes taking place, but what we are seeing, of course, in Syria, in Palestine, and in Lebanon, dramatic developments. And the question is how this will impact on the rest of the region. And as I said, hopefully we are now in a situation where Syria can play a positive role and not a negative role. And if Syria is stabilized, it will also have a positive impact on the rest of the region. And that is what we need to make sure.
And that's what you are working on.
This is what we are working on.
Personal questions, personal too, but very short, if you want to answer. Because I think it's the key. Were you shocked or surprised the way Assad left the country?
I thought in the end, he sort of, when we saw what was happening, that most probably he would be leaving. But that he left the way he did, yes, I found that shocking. That there was not a message, nothing, to the people he had governed for so many years. It's hard to understand that was really possible. Some
former key Syrian government officials, like if we name like Bashar Jafari, like very prominent figures, like symbolic figures of the previous regime, came out after 8th of December with completely new messages. How do you see this?
It's not the first time where we see when authoritarian states collapse that we see suddenly a change in people who have been key components of that state. It's a phenomenon we saw all over Eastern Europe. I remember, I was serving as a diplomat in East Germany immediately after the collapse of the Berlin Wall.
89?
I was there in 1991, and I was then traveling a lot in the East, and it was amazing to see how quickly previously loyal communists turned into conservative, committed members of the Christian Democratic Union. So this is happening, and I assure you, this will also happen in Syria. But I think what we really need to do, look beyond that. We need to look and see if there can be some, real accountability, but also real reconciliation.
Mr. Beiderson, thank you so much for this great interview to المجلة. And so I hope very soon you will be in Damascus working on having inclusive government for the whole Syrians.
It's my hope too that we can be on help and assistance, and that, as we have discussed, that we can see a new beginning for the Syrian people. As always, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.